professionals. So our next speaker coming up is Karin. It's Karin Jacobson. She'll be presenting Navigating the Uncharted Waters of Unintended Consequences in Tobacco Regulation Policies. Karin is a Science Engagement Director at Japan Tobacco International and based in Geneva, Switzerland. In her role, Karin leads the scientific engagement activities, develops external scientific messaging, and drives understanding of tobacco and nicotine product science. Prior to joining JTI in 2017, Karin worked as a research scientist in academia and the biotechnology industry before transitioning to work for a consulting company specializing in neuroscience. Originally from Sweden, Karin holds a PhD in pharmaceutical science from the University of Basel in Switzerland. Today, in this Science Lab session, Karin will present the work of her colleagues Matias Caldez and Leonie Price.
Hello everyone, my name is Matias and I am a member of the Scientific and Regulatory Affairs team at Japan Tobacco International. Our presentation today focuses on the unexpected consequences of tobacco control policies, with an emphasis on electronic cigarette flavor restrictions. Historically, regulatory measures for tobacco products are designed to protect the public from potential health risks. But there is a lack of real-world data to inform creation of a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment to support the intended goals of regulations. Policies based on traditional tobacco control strategies might not have the expected outcomes when applied to products that have the potential to reduce the health risk associated with smoking, such as electronic cigarettes. In fact, a growing number of countries are adopting tobacco harm reduction as a complementary strategy to traditional tobacco control policies. This is particularly important when these regulations do not reflect the complexity of real-world consumer behavior. Such shifts in consumer actions that cannot be anticipated may have far-reaching implications. Therefore, acknowledging the outcomes of unintended consequences of regulation is critical to refine regulations for different scenarios, to support tobacco harm reduction efforts, and to mitigate any negative impact in the sustainable growth of our industry. Our goal for this work was to systematically study the unintended outcomes of tobacco regulation, with a particular focus on flavor bans in electronic cigarettes. After searching terms in PubMed, we retrieved 95 papers regarding tobacco and nicotine product regulations. Excluding 3 review articles, we categorized the remaining 92 based on regulation type, with a keen focus on the 31 papers about flavor bans. We paid special attention to the 23 articles addressing generic flavors, and 8 concerning menthol were excluded. Our initial analysis pointed out at important issues in the research in relation to e-cigarettes flavor bans. Some of the concerns included a wide range of user flavor preferences that may affect the universal claim of the results. Also, the ambiguity around how bans influence consumption of either conventional or electronic cigarettes may lead to a deficit of research on the comprehensive impact of flavor bans. Finally, there was a lack of precise evaluation on smoker needs and on how these restrictions affect consumer well-being, satisfaction, and usage patterns. Only 5 of the 23 articles focused on the unintended consequences of flavor bans in electronic cigarettes. As such, the studies concluded that flavor restrictions may drive consumers to change their behaviors in ways that are not intended by regulators. Another study pointed out that upon flavor restrictions, consumers often get banned products through both illegal methods or legitimate purchasing of other flavors to add to their e-liquids. Also, while restriction may aim to reduce adolescent use of e-cigarettes, there could be a consequence of prompting the youth initiation of conventional tobacco products. Finally, regulations that are intended to make electronic cigarettes less palatable might have a negative impact in the tobacco harm reduction goals. This study pointed out that such restriction leads to increased traditional cigarette usage and guide consumers towards riskier, unregulated sources. What was even more striking is that this area lacks sufficient scientific investigation, a gap that was evident across broader tobacco regulatory discussions, including sales and age restrictions, and nicotine level and comprehensive restrictions, as well as taxation and the impact of tobacco harm reduction outcomes. In conclusion, researching the impact of flavor ban is scientifically lacking, particularly in evaluating consumer satisfaction. Scientific literature revealed unintended consequences of the global tobacco policy enforcement, not only on tobacco flavor restrictions, but other regulatory measures as well. Finally, there is a pressing need for more research to fully understand the unintended consequences of regulation and addressing the effectiveness of regulation against original intended goals. With that, I wish to thank you all for your attention and interest in this critical topic. Your participation is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Dr. Jacobson, would you like to add anything else?
Yes, thank you, Samer. So not so much maybe to add something, but really to reiterate what my colleague was mentioning, that there's really a need for more robust and well-structured studies in this area. There are often discussions on restrictions, on policy measures, and of course there are these expected outcomes. But then what we see, there might not always be studies actually to assess if the expected outcome has come to pass and what could also happen in addition, what would be additional consequences. So really, again, to reiterate, there is definitely a big research gap here and need for more and more structures, not just then in the area of flavor restrictions, but also in other areas. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions.
So I've got one. What motivated you specifically to look at the relationship between flavors and e-cigarettes in this piece of work?
So we do know that there is a lot of discussions on flavor restrictions. This is something that we see a lot in media, in the research interest. There's a lot of studies on who's using what, on the different flavors. And there has been a number of studies trying to predict what would happen if certain restrictions would be enforced. Now we have seen such measures as well, and there are starting to come out studies actually that have assessed this. And what we wanted to see was, how are these restrictions implemented, and what are the consequences? It's a very widely debated subject. And we wanted to see if these measures have actually resulted in what was expected and what are additional consequences.
As it is just off the press, I just want to offer this bit of a new survey that just came out a couple of days ago. So in Quebec, which is one of the biggest provinces in Canada, flavor ban was implemented October 31st of this year. And a couple of days ago, survey showed that 36% of vapers that had quit cigarette are back into smoking cigarette due to the ban of flavor. So that's our reality. I'm not sure if it compares to other types of data that you have. Thanks.
I was happy to hear that because it's in line with exactly what I'm going to say. Prediction studies, these models are not going to help much because every country has a different reality. I think Colin Mendelsohn has made very clear what happened in Australia. And the take-home message in the end is that we really need to to take advantage of these poor realities, to use them to our advantage and to show the world that things are deadly wrong the way they're being carried out.
Yes, thank you. Maybe also just to comment on this study from Canada. I think this, again, was something really that my colleagues also saw doing this work, that, yes, while some of the studies, they might, I think the scope of the studies is very limited. They do look at certain measures, but they don't look at the comprehensive, they don't look at the full picture. And specifically this, if then people that are using, that have found products that they are happy with, if all of a sudden those products are no longer available, what would happen? What's the impact, not just on e-cigarette use, on those specific flavored e-cigarette use, but also on cigarette smoking? So, yes, indeed.
Great, thank you so much.